Hey, my friends! I hope life is treating you kindly. Today's story reminds us that genius isn't just about IQ or being the best at school. It's about curiosity, passion, and the courage to be different. Today's story is about the incredible real-life journey of Albert Einstein, a boy who once struggled in school, was slow to speak, and faced rejection, but grew up to become one of the greatest minds in human history. It's the story of how a quiet, curious child followed his questions, even when no one else understood him. So, if you've ever felt misunderstood, or doubted, or told you're not good enough, this story is for you. Albert Einstein's name shines like a star in the sky of science. When you hear Einstein, you might picture wild white hair and a playful smile. But behind that gentle face was a boy whose mind burned with questions and whose heart beat with wonder. His journey from a quiet child in Germany to the world's greatest scientist is a story of curiosity, courage, and hope. This is the real life of Albert Einstein. On a cool morning of March 14th, 1879, in the German city of Ulm, a baby boy named Albert was born into a humble Jewish family. His father, Hermann Einstein, sold electrical equipment. His mother, Pauline Koch, played the piano with warmth and grace. The Einstein home was filled with music, gentle laughter, and loving whispers. Strangely, Albert did not speak clearly until he was almost 3 years old. Neighbors joked that he would never find the right words. His parents worried, but they never lost faith. Within their quiet house, Albert's mind raced with thoughts far beyond his years. He watched the world carefully, taking in every detail: how dust danced in sunbeams, how steam curled from their kettle, and how shadows shifted as the day wore on. One evening, Hermann brought home a small compass as a gift. He placed it in Albert's tiny hand and watched the boy's eyes widen. That little needle always pointed north, even though the boy held it at strange angles. Young Albert sat there for a long time, his finger tracing the arc of the needle, marveling at the invisible force that guided it. He later wrote, "I can still remember that this experience made a deep and lasting impression upon me. Something deeply hidden had to be behind things." This moment planted the first seed of his life's work. At 5, Albert began formal schooling in Munich. His teachers admired his quick mind, but grew impatient with his habit of questioning everything. When others recited facts by rote, Albert wanted reasons and proofs. He found the strict lessons dull, and he often daydreamed instead of writing exercises. In class, he sketched geometric figures in the margins of his notebooks, imagining worlds shaped by strange rules. By age 9, he had begun to teach himself math and geometry. His uncle Jacob gave him books on Euclid, and Albert devoured them by candlelight. He wrote in his diary, "The joy I feel when I conquer a mathematical problem is like the joy of a child who has plucked a forbidden fruit." Yet at home, his gentle heart ached at the sight of cruelty. He once intervened when older boys tormented a child smaller than themselves. He was not strong, but his calm voice and earnest eyes shamed the tormentors into shame and silence. Despite flashes of brilliance, Albert struggled with the rigid school system. His teachers labeled him idle or slow, not realizing that his deepest learning happened in silence as he watched the world. When he turned 15, his family moved to Milan for his father's business. Albert, however, stayed behind to finish school. The separation from his parents pained him deeply. He felt like a songbird trapped in a cage, longing for home. That childhood compass stayed with Albert in memory like a talisman. Years later, he would compare it to his own mind, invisible forces shaping the universe in ways most could not see. Each night, he climbed onto the roof of his boarding house in Munich and gazed at the stars, imagining unseen currents of gravity and time bending around those distant lights. At home in Italy, he built a small laboratory in his bedroom. He conducted simple experiments with magnets and springs, documenting each result in detailed notebooks. His parents worried that their dreamer son was losing touch with reality, but Pauline often found him late at night playing the piano, his long fingers dancing over the keys, music and motion combining into a single dance of thought. In 1895, Albert left the Luitpold Gymnasium without a diploma, convinced that the discipline of memorization killed wonder. He took the entrance exam for the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. On the first try, he failed the general portion. This was a bitter blow. He returned to Munich to join his family, but felt adrift, like a boat cut loose from its anchor. Yet this defeat steeled his resolve. He spent a year studying on his own in Aarau, Switzerland, staying with the family of his friend, Heinrich Weber. He read physics texts by Helmholtz and Kirchhoff, and solved problem after problem. When he retook the exam in 1896, his score was high enough to enter the Polytechnic. That moment taught Albert an unforgettable lesson. Failure is not the end, but a detour that can guide you to clearer paths if you keep walking. As he would later say, "It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer." In Zurich, Albert found freedom at last. He moved into a boarding house filled with other students who played music, debated philosophy, and laughed until dawn. He formed a close friendship with Michel Besso, a fellow physics student who would become his lifelong confidant. Besso was the only person Einstein ever called a true friend, and he later told Albert's biographers that their conversations shaped many of Einstein's ideas. Albert also fell in love, for the first time, with a fellow student, Mileva Maric. They studied together, spent evenings at cafes, and walked by the Limit River discussing the nature of light. In a letter to Mileva, Albert wrote, "When I am with you, the stars burn brighter, and my thoughts flow like water in a mountain stream." Though their relationship was complicated, it fueled his passion for understanding both the world and the human heart. After graduation in 1900, Albert hoped for a university position, but found none. Rejected and frustrated, he accepted a job as a technical expert at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern in 1902. The office was cramped and filled with papers, but it offered Albert two precious gifts: steady income and time to think. While examining patents for electromagnetic devices, he pondered deep questions. What is light? Does time flow at the same rate everywhere? Each evening, he retreated to a small room where he sketched thought experiments in a notebook. He imagined riding alongside a beam of light, watching the universe frozen before him. He pictured two clocks ticking at different speeds when one moved faster than the other. In 1905, his Annus Mirabilis, or Miracle Year, Albert published 4 groundbreaking papers in the journal Annalen der Physik. They tackled the photoelectric effect, showing that light behaves like particles or photons, Brownian motion, proving the reality of atoms, special relativity, and mass-energy equivalence, introducing the famous equation E equals mc squared. No scientist in history had ever reshaped so many fields at once. When his colleagues at the patent office learned of his achievements, they were stunned. The quiet clerk had rewritten the laws of the universe. The special theory of relativity turned our world upside down. Albert proposed that the laws of physics are the same for all observers, moving at constant speed relative to each other, and that the speed of light is constant in every frame. From these simple ideas flowed astonishing conclusions. Moving clocks tick more slowly, objects shrink in the direction of motion, and nothing can exceed the speed of light. At first, many scientists scoffed. They could not imagine such strange behavior. But Albert had the courage of his convictions. When he visited other physicists, he carried little notebooks filled with equations, demonstrating his results with gentle calm. He never raised his voice or criticized others. He simply showed them the maths and asked them to look again. In a lecture in 1911, he said, "People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." This bold statement captured the wonder and mystery of relativity. 10 years after special relativity, Albert unveiled the theory of general relativity in 1915. He proposed that gravity is not a force pulling objects together, but the bending of space and time by mass. Imagine a heavy ball placed on a rubber sheet, creating a dip that causes smaller balls to roll toward it. In Einstein's view, the sun bends the fabric of space-time, and Earth follows the curved path around it. This mind-bending idea took 2 more years to prove. In 1919, during a solar eclipse, British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington measured starlight bending around the sun exactly as Einstein had predicted. Newspapers around the world reported heavenly proof of Einstein's theory. Overnight, the quiet professor became a global hero. Crowds gathered in streets to catch a glimpse of him when he visited England, and magazine covers bore his smiling face. While his scientific fame soared, Albert's personal life was complex. He married Mileva Maric in 1903, and they had 2 sons, Hans Albert and Edward, and a daughter, Lieserl, whose fate remains a mystery. Some historians believe Lieserl was born with special needs and was given up for adoption or died young. Albert rarely spoke of her, and little is known of her life, a reminder that behind his genius was a man with deep personal struggles. In 1919, Albert divorced Mileva and married his cousin, Elsa Lowenthal. Elsa cared for Albert with devotion, and they enjoyed a comfortable life in Berlin. But Albert never forgot the earlier days of hunger and poverty. In letters to friends, he often reflected on the cost of ambition. A calm and modest life will bring more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness, he advised. He also cherished music. At family gatherings, he played his violin, Lena, he called it, pouring his emotions into each note. He believed that feeling and intuition were just as important as logic. "The theory of relativity occurred to me by intuition," he once wrote, and music was the driving force behind that intuition. Albert Einstein's conscience was as strong as his intellect. When World War I broke out, he was horrified by the slaughter. He joined scholars across Europe in citing pacifist petitions. In his letters, he described war as a disease of the human spirit. He toured Switzerland and gave speeches pleading for peace and understanding among nations. In 1933, Hitler's rise to power forced Einstein to flee Germany. As a Jew and a vocal critic of Nazism, he knew his life was in danger. He settled at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. America embraced him, and he traveled across the country giving lectures, signing books, and meeting presidents. Yet he never lost his empathy for refugees. In letters to colleagues, he organized help for scientists escaping persecution. He wrote, I speak as one who feels the anguish of those torn from their homes, and I cannot remain silent. In 1939, Albert learned that German scientists were building atomic bombs. Worried that the Nazis would create a weapon of unimaginable power, he wrote a careful letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He warned that uranium chain reactions could release vast energy and urged the U.S. to begin similar research. This letter helped launch the Manhattan Project, though Albert himself later regretted the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. After World War II ended with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Einstein spoke out against nuclear arms. He joined the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists and urged the world toward peaceful uses of nuclear energy. He said, "I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." His words rang with both sorrow and hope. In his later years, Albert pursued a unified theory to combine gravity with electromagnetism. He spent countless hours on this quest, though he never succeeded. He worked at home in Princeton, where he was greeted each morning by a squirrel that scampered onto his windowsill. He fed it bits of bread and watched it chatter in delight. Even in his 80s, his mind was sharp, his curiosity boundless. But his health began to fail. On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein quietly passed away at age 76. He left behind equations that continue to guide physicists and a legacy of compassion that inspires us all. Albert Einstein's life reminds us that greatness often grows from quiet beginnings. It shows us that curiosity can overcome doubt, that failure can lead to triumph, and that a humble heart can change the world. He once said, "Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile." In his equations, his letters, and his music, we find a guide for living with wonder and empathy. So when you feel small or different, remember the boy in Ulm who barely spoke, the student who failed an exam, and the clerk who rewrote the laws of physics. Remember the man who played violin to tame his thoughts and wrote letters to save humanity from itself. Above all, remember his simple prayer: God doesn't play dice with the universe. For in that gentle refusal to accept randomness, we see a mind that believed deeply in order, meaning, and the power of human imagination.